are family.
Outstanding effort again.
We're busting ours to kick yours.
That's big time.
-15.
Respect all, fear none.
Oh, did he belt that one?
Intensity is not a perfume.
It was a no-doubter.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
We are up in the bird's nest here at Oriole Park at Camden Yards. I'm Brendan Mortensen alongside Annie Klaff. We are not even really in the bird's nest. We are in the web studio rather than the podcast room. But this is, again, the first time in what feels like a while that we have actually been in the warehouse doing this podcast. So it counts enough as the bird's nest.
No, it definitely does. It feels good to be person to person instead of Zoom for a podcast for the first time in what honestly might have been a month. I don't think we have been
that sounds
together
about right.
for a bird's nest episode in either the actual bird's nest or in the studio, just in the warehouse in general, in probably a month. So it's good to be back.
Yeah. Since at least before the deadline, we have not been here
maybe
for a
even
podcast.
the draft. No, we did the draft preview in person, I think.
Whatever it is, it's been a while.
Yeah, I think that was the last one.
Annie, you're caffeinated. You're ready to go.
Unfortunately, I'm caffeinated because I'm definitely shaky. For those who don't know.
It's going to make for an interesting podcast.
For those who don't know, I've quit caffeine, and now I drank some this morning, and I'm far too jittery.
So you didn't really quit caffeine?
Well, I had quit beforehand.
Sure.
And now I drank
And you've
caffeine.
fallen off the wagon for the first time.
I have fallen off the wagon for the first time in maybe a couple of months. So
whoa.
I am jazzed up.
Well, this is going to be an exciting podcast. We have a lot to talk about. And today on the show, Annie, I kind of just wanted to debrief a little bit, take a little bit of an inventory, because the Orioles have lost a lot of big league talent at the deadline. They get a lot of good prospects back. We talked about it last week when we broke down the trade deadline. The farm system looks completely different between the MLB draft and what the Orioles got back at the deadline. They have now really rejuvenated a farm system that was, it wasn't what it used to be. Right? The farm system had seen a lot of graduations. There were guys that had been dealt away for big league talent. And now, when you look at this top 30, whenever it's updated by MLB Pipeline with draft guys, if you look at it on Baseball America, there is a ton of new talent in this top 30. And that's what we talked about last week. But this week, I kind of just wanted to talk about what's happening at the big league level, because there are a lot of new faces. There are a lot of goals that have now shifted over the final 2 months of the season. And there's honestly a time to kind of reflect after the dust has settled a little bit to go, okay, where are we and how did we get here? So that's kind of the plan for today.
And I think it's a very necessary podcast topic to just kind of zoom out and look at everything that's happened, where the Orioles are right now, where can they go from here? I know that in slightly earlier in the season when the expectations were a little bit lower, or they have kind of not met the expectations that were set in the beginning of the season. And we kind of did a zoom out episode then of like, okay, how can the Orioles still make this season successful? Obviously now a lot of things have changed since then, and we kind of know where the Orioles can go from here. Because back then it was like, okay, we don't really necessarily know if they're going to be buyers or sellers at the trade deadline. There was still room for many different ways to go about that. And then now that we finally know they were sellers, they were busy at the trade deadline. Like you mentioned, lots of different faces. So definitely a very necessary kind of zoom out type of episode revolving the Orioles.
Yeah, we're going to get into all of that. But first, we do need to start with an injury update. And that is about Grayson Rodriguez, who is getting elbow surgery. And it is not Tommy John. It is not Tommy John surgery for Grayson Rodriguez. The expectation is that he is going to be ready for spring training heading into 2026, but he is going to miss the remainder of 2025. It is essentially an elbow surgery where he is getting like bone chips out of his elbow and getting rid of like debris is essentially
similar to what happened with Danny Coulomb.
Similar, yes, where there were bone chips in the elbow from the sounds of things. Grayson Rodriguez went on foul territory and basically said this is something that he's been dealing with for a while, and he thinks it's what's been contributing to a lot of the smaller injuries here and there, and it just got to the point where he wasn't able to work around it anymore. And this was a weird situation all year with Grayson Rodriguez because at the beginning of the season in spring training, he goes down with the elbow triceps inflammation. That happens in February. And then in April, it's a lat strain, which is something that he dealt with back in June of 2022. That's the first time we heard about the lat injuries for Grayson Rodriguez. And then he goes back and he tries to adjust his mechanics because the lat had been an issue a lot. And so he's trying to take pressure off of that. And who knows if that contributed to the elbow. There was a good bit of mystery surrounding the injury. And finally, a few weeks ago, we hear that it was an elbow injury again rather than the lat injury. And now he is finally getting the surgery. So there was a lot of mystery surrounding it, and we didn't know exactly what the timeline looks like, but it sounds like things are just going to get cleaned up, and hopefully it is a healthy spring training and going into 2026 for Grayson.
Yeah, it's obviously a difficult thing to look back and just look at the 2025 season for Grayson Rodriguez because obviously no one either could have forecasted that or wanted that to happen for Rodriguez, especially when you go towards the end of 2024 with the season that he was having, and then he had that weird injury at the end where Albert Suarez had to come in, and Mike Elias just told everyone that, look, we're not going to rush Grayson Rodriguez to get him back for the postseason because this is a guy that we really kind of want to nurture and make sure that he is fully ready to go for the next season and beyond. And obviously things did not go according to plan for him, especially just when you knew what he could have been for this starting rotation in 2025, but obviously going to kind of be the same exact thing where you want to really kind of baby this kind of injury for Rodriguez, just knowing how much value he can provide once he is fully healthy. So obviously you never want to hear about an elbow surgery, but it is good news that it is not Tommy John.
Yeah, and maybe it's one of those things, as Grayson said, he feels like it's contributed to a lot of injuries over the past. And when Grayson Rodriguez has been out in past seasons, there was never a major surgery, right? He was out for a bit, and then he was rehabbing, and then he comes back. So who knows? Maybe this is something that is able to help him avoid some of those shorter injured list stints that we have seen in the past. So Grayson Rodriguez out for the remainder of 2025. The hope is that he'll be back and ready for 2026. Some other injury updates as well. Kyle Bradish and Tyler Wells, both in AAA Norfolk. Tony Mansolino basically said we are going to take full advantage of the rehab time that they are allotted because they can get, I believe it's 6 starts, 30 days on a rehab assignment. So they are going to use all of that time that they have to be able to build Kyle Bradish and Tyler Wells back up to the point where they feel comfortable getting them back into a big league rotation or a big league bullpen. In the case of Tyler Wells, we'll see what the plan is there. But both of those guys on a good track. All of the feedback after their starts has been good. Kyle Bradish and Tyler Wells will hopefully be back at some point here pretty soon.
Yeah, which also at the same time makes sense that you're not necessarily going to force their rehab assignments and get them quickly back to the rotation or to the big league roster as much as probably you would have, say, if you were at the record that the Orioles had this point last season. So it is kind of a good thing that you are also going to kind of make sure that they get all the amount of reps that they need in the minor leagues for that rehab assignment. Also, we have said this multiple times before where it's not really important to pay attention to the numbers in AAA, especially for something like this with the rehab assignment, because obviously you haven't necessarily gotten great numbers from Tyler Wells, Kyle Bradish, but obviously it's all about getting back into the swing of things for both of them. And so definitely some good news for those two. Obviously not so great news with Grayson Rodriguez, but some other good news down on rehab assignment front otherwise.
Yeah, good news for them. Ryan Mountcastle in the process of getting back as well. There was some thought he could be back for this series against Philadelphia. Is a few days later than that. The target date to get a guy back from a rehab assignment is plus or minus a few days. It ends up being minus a few days. But Mansolino said that the hamstring for Mountcastle, no concern there, looks great, and he will be back at some point shortly, which will be a big boost to the lineup as well. All right, let's get into the meat and potatoes of this thing. I kind of want to start with where are we, and then we'll get into what happened and what was supposed to happen. Okay. But we'll start with the where are we, because as mentioned, this is a team that lost a lot of big league talent at the deadline. They get a lot of good stuff back, but you are still down 9 big league players, which is a lot of big league players. 4 members of the bullpen, a starter in Charlie Morton, and then members of the lineup in O'Hearn, Laureano, Mullins, Urias. And then, of course, still injured, you are missing Ryan Mountcastle, Felix Bautista, Zach Eflin, Kyle Bradish, Tyler Wells. So there's a lot of new faces at this point. The core is still in place, which is something that this team has emphasized a lot. Tony Mansolino notes, kind of the big 5 core position players as Gunnar Henderson, Adley Rutschman, Jordan Westberg, Jackson Holiday, Colton Cowser. Those are the 5 that Mansolino refers to as the guys that are going to be leaders on this team, that are going to lead the charge over the final 2 months of the season and into 2026. This is very much their team now. The veteran leaders are elsewhere, and they are now the leaders of this team. Right. Jordan Westberg kind of said, they have been building us up to this moment when we would kind of take over the clubhouse. And, kind of in a funny quote, he said it's time for us to put our big boy pants on and be the leaders in this clubhouse. But those are the guys that are going to lead this team from now on.
Yeah, and especially when you looked into the 2025 season in the off season when we were looking ahead to the start, we knew that they were going to have to take this step up eventually, and this was the year that they were going to have to do so, just because you kind of expected some moves at the trade deadline and expected these expiring contracts with leaders of the clubhouse who are no longer with the team. So you knew that this was going to happen. They knew that this was going to happen. I think that what will be interesting to see is who becomes more vocal, because I know that a guy like Westberg is no doubt a leader. He's just not necessarily a vocal one, and it'll be interesting. And I can full-heartedly see that he would become a vocal leader. Just whether if that's just being vocal or not. I mean, he's going to be a leader regardless. The same goes for Gunnar and Adley. I think you can kind of just see based on their personalities who would be more vocal. You got the Colton of the group as well. So it'll be really important for those core 5 members to step up like they knew that they were going to have to do in the beginning of the season anyway. Yeah,
and Mansolino kind of said it seems like Westberg might even be the leader among those guys.
Yeah.
I mean, he might not necessarily be the best player among that group. Gunnar Henderson is putting together another spectacular season, but just based on everybody's personalities and how they carry themselves, Jordan Westberg might be that guy, and he might be that guy in that clubhouse. So we'll see, but those clubhouse roles are going to have to develop. And right now it has to develop because there are so many young guys at the big league level that are now joining the team or becoming more important parts of the team. There are probably going to be more prospects joining over the span of the next few weeks. Dylan Beavers, Samuel Basayo, the 2 names that are tossed out a lot. They are mashing in AAA Norfolk, and we will probably see them sooner rather than later. But you've got other guys that have been, called upon to be contributors as well. Jeremiah Jackson is a name that has started a bunch of consecutive games here, kind of out of necessity, right?
Yeah.
He missed Tyler O'Neill for a bit. He was out with an illness, and then he jams his wrist on the wall yesterday. So Jeremiah Jackson has been getting a lot of reps in right field, even though he's been a utility infielder all season. They're asking him to do a lot. You are going to see a lot of these younger names pop up on the lineup card and in the bullpen. There are now, the bullpen, you've got Keegan Aiken and Yennier Cano, and then it consists of Cade Stroud, Grant Wolfram, Corbin Martin, Elvin Rodriguez, Dietrich Enns, and Yaramil Geraldo.
Yeah.
It's a lot of names we didn't think we would have in this bullpen at the beginning of the year. So the leaders are going to have to step up just because there are so many guys trying to get comfortable at the big league level at this point. Jeremiah Jackson, one of those position players as an example, but you also have, Vidal Brujan, who was just claimed off waivers. Ryan Noda, who has bounced around all over the place this year, is now in that clubhouse. You got to find some form of cohesion here with so many new names.
Right, and I think that obviously this is going to be the time to do it when necessarily you have the room and the opportunity to do so. You're not necessarily trying to make it past September at this point in time, so it gives you an opportunity to have new guys step in there and get those reps. Jeremiah Jackson's a really perfect example because obviously you can tell he's new to the majors. There's been a few defensive errors, but for the most part, he's still just getting used to being a major league player, especially for the Orioles too. So I think that it's important right now to kind of take a step back and look at the opportunity that the Orioles have, especially when you look at maybe getting Dylan Beavers up soon, Samuel Basayo up soon, and kind of having them interwoven with this young core that's still intact. You mentioned the bullpen. It's going to look very different. It's going to be a little bit of a patience test, no doubt. But so far, you've had some pretty surprisingly great appearances, Cade Stroud, obviously a 1.93 ERA in 7 appearances this year. You had Corbin Martin, obviously a rough outing in Philly, but before that and before the trade deadline, he got his first career save. So definitely some good notes for some of these guys, and it's going to be a little bit of, first career marks for some of them, which is really great to see, especially when it comes to debuts coming up soon. But it is going to be a little bit more of a patience test as opposed to, we're getting some really great already big league level guys at the trade deadline. This is just different.
Yeah, and that's what you're going to be looking for over the final 2 months of the season. Is the core going to continue to play well? Are there guys that are going to join that conversation? Kobe Mayo is going to play pretty much every day. So is Kobe Mayo going to step into, being the kind of player that we know he has the potential to be? It's going to take growing pains. That's what happens at the big league level. But can he kind of add his name to that core group of guys? Basayo and Beavers, maybe the same way. What do they have to prove over the final 2 months of the season up at the big league level? Can they get their feet wet, maybe hit the ground running a little bit? And are you going to find the next Ramon Arias type of guy, the next Brian Baker type of guy? Ramon Arias, Brian Baker, 2 guys that were claimed off of waivers and turned into solid contributors and guys that you eventually flipped and got value for at trade deadlines. Could Jeremiah Jackson turn into a Ramon Arias, where he is a utility infielder that can play a bunch of different positions, maybe utility outfielder too? Could a Cade Stroud turn into a Brian Baker, where it's not a high-name prospect, it's somebody who gets a chance over the final 2 months of the season, and maybe they stick around in the bullpen? There's a lot of opportunity for especially the bullpen arms, given what this bullpen has gone through, just, kind of rolling over here with 4 names out of that bullpen. Who can stick around in 2026? Is it Cade Stroud? Grant Wolfram has shown a lot of good stuff. Corbin Martin, like you mentioned. Can any of those guys establish themselves as future pieces? The opportunity is there. And so I think that's what you have to look for over the final 2 months of the season, is who can make a case to stick around in 2026, and how does this core perform going into next season?
And it's also a difficult time, too, to be able to evaluate these guys as they just come up or just come to a new ball club, especially when you're playing against a team like the Phillies or a team like the Cubs, who have had really great seasons. Obviously, you have some of these new bullpen arms who are going up against some of the best lineups in baseball right now. So obviously, you have to kind of give them a little bit of wiggle room to be able to prove themselves, just especially with the point that the Orioles are at right now compared to some of these teams that they're playing and the positions that they're throwing some of these new bullpen arms in, or utility infielders in, or even some new catchers. I mean, Alex Jackson has been great for what he's had to do this season with that revolving door of catching injuries that the Orioles have had. So you've had some guys most certainly prove themselves. And like you mentioned, it'll be really, really interesting to see who can kind of be that diamond in the rough that the Orioles have been lucky to find in those Ariases and Brian Bakers of the league. So it's definitely going to be some growing pains, some patience, but it will be very exciting to see which kind of guys you can surefirely say, okay, they have a spot on the roster in 2026 that meshes well with the core that's intact. Yeah,
it's the land of opportunity. If you play well over the final 2 months of the season, you can very well make a case for yourself for 2026. But I kind of want to just look at how we got here, because I think there's a lot of revisionist history, especially about the offseason. And with these months now passing, you can look back on April and in May when this team went 18-34 and go, okay, how the heck did that happen? And so let's go back there, because the Orioles have been a good baseball team for the last 2 months. Since June 1st, they had a top 10 record in the game. They were 6 games over 500. If they kept that pace for the entire season, that's a wild card team at least. They are fighting for that division if they are at least over 500 every month. And they were clearly capable of doing it, because that's what they did in June and July. That's a 2-month sample size of being a good baseball team, the same way it was in April and May, when it was a 2-month sample size of being not a good baseball team. So let's start in April. And I think the biggest thing to remember, I know that injuries are not everything, but as we kind of break down what happened here, in April, the list of names that played 0 games this month, this is even excluding guys that you knew you weren't going to have going into spring training, right? So that's Kyle Bradish, Tyler Wells. The guys that you thought you were going to have, at least in spring training, going into the season, that played 0 games in April include Colton Cowser, Grayson Rodriguez, Albert Suarez, and Trevor Rogers. Important names, I would say. So in that month, what happened? Jordan Westburg plays 19 games pretty much through injury. You remember Brandon Hyde saying that Jordan Westburg could barely walk into the clubhouse, and he just fought through it for 19 games. He hits 173 with a 482 OPS, and then at the end of the month goes down, doesn't play again until June. Gunnar Henderson misses a majority of spring training, and so April kind of becomes the time when he's figuring things out. He doesn't play in that first series against Toronto. He comes back in early April. He hits 228 with a 681 OPS because, again, he missed pretty much the entirety of spring training. Adley Rutschman starts slow. Jackson Holliday starts slow, still kind of figuring things out. Tyler O'Neill only plays 14 games through injuries. He hits 118 with a 448 OPS. Ramon Laureano hadn't picked things up yet. He hits 200 with a 696 OPS. So you had some slow starts in the lineup. You had Jordan Westburg and Gunnar Henderson, who, in Westburg's case, like I said, was playing through an injury. In Henderson's case, did not have spring training. And then combine that with guys just starting slow, and it's not a good formula for the lineup with Colton Cowser not in it.
Right. And you hit on how, obviously, you can't necessarily just blame injuries, but when you look at how at least March and April went compared to May and June when you started to get guys back, it is a very shocking difference where, yes, since June 1st, they've been 30 and 27, a 738 OPS, and a 447 ERA since June 1st. That span from at least, we'll start at opening day, March 27th to May 30th, 21 and 36 with a 687 OPS and a 535 ERA. That's a pretty big difference between those. And you can, yes, we know that you can't necessarily just blame injuries, and underperformance goes along with it too, but it was a very big difference when you start to get guys like Colton Cowser back, Jordan Westburg fully healthy again, and several other players like Trevor Rogers as well. You mentioned the guys that necessarily didn't play at all in April that you thought. You could also lump Andrew Kittredge in there, someone that you acquired in the offseason that you thought would be a big contributor. Chase McDermott, who could have been another depth rotation piece. And then also Heston Kjerstad, who played, but necessarily also lumped into that same category as Adley Rutschman, Gunnar Henderson with some underperformance. Obviously, he didn't have kind of the same expectations that Gunnar and Adley had. So it was just a mixture of injuries and underperformance. And I know we've said this all season long. But you can also just take a look at specifics where the rotation wasn't performing well. The offense was not hitting against left-handers well when you could have had Gunnar, who had probably his best season against left-handers last year that you thought you were going to get again. You didn't have Jordan Westburg in most games for April and May, who could have hit against left-handers, even though he has reverse splits. So there was just a whole boatload of things in April. Yeah, and the purpose of doing this is not to go back and figure out who to blame. Right? The purpose of doing it is going back because there's a tendency to look at April and May and just say, well, it was a terrible offseason and the team stinks and this is why. That's not really what happened, right? So this is more of going back and saying, okay, what actually did happen over this month? And in April specifically, I feel comfortable blaming injuries for Colton Cowser playing 0 games, Jordan Westburg fighting through injury for 19 games with a 482 OPS. That's not Jordan Westburg. Gunnar Henderson missing spring training and having a 681 OPS, and Tyler O'Neill never finding a rhythm with a 448 OPS. I can blame injuries pretty safely for all of those numbers. Yeah, Adley and Jackson and Ramon Laureano got off to a slower start. That happens in baseball. And, when you go to the pitching side, too, Zach Eflin only starts 2 games with a 3 ERA. You're missing Grayson, Suarez, Rogers, Bradish, and Wells. And then Charlie Morton has trouble locating the curveball. He's got a 9.26 ERA in 6 games. Dean Kramer has a slow start with a 6.75 ERA in April. And so you combine that with Eflin being injured and Grayson being injured and Suarez being injured and Rogers being injured. Things add up like that. And I think Kramer is a really good example in this scenario because Dean Kramer is a notorious slow starter throughout his career. And he did the same thing in 2023. It's pretty much a similar split in April of 2023 where he starts that season with a bad ERA. But guess what? Nobody really cared
because the Orioles were winning, and it wasn't compounded with a bunch of different things happening in that month. All of these things independently can happen. They just can't happen one on top of the other. If Adley Rutschman starts the year slow and Jackson Holliday is still figuring things out as a big leaguer, and Colton Cowser, Gunnar Henderson, and Jordan Westberg aren't all hurt or coming back from injury during that point, you survive those things happening. If Dean Kramer starts the year slow and Zach Eflin, Grayson Rodriguez, Albert Suarez, and Trevor Rogers aren't hurt, you survive Dean Kramer starting the year slow, but it can't happen at the same time as all of the other things are happening.
And you can compare that to last season too, where yes, they made it to the playoffs for the second year in a row. And there were many times throughout the season of 2024 where you felt like, okay, the rotation's doing really well right now, but the offense is slumping. Or the offense is doing really well right now, but the starting rotation is injured and not doing well. This year has been completely different where you have them at the same time. You haven't really had a full strength rotation, and you haven't necessarily had your offense performing to their potential at the very same time. So you can kind of see the results from last year where you made it to the playoffs, but they weren't happening at the same time. It makes complete sense where you have them happening at the same time in 2025 unexpectedly, and then you are here where you are right now.
Yeah, and a similar thing happens in May where, again, the guys who played 0 games in May, Colton Cowser, Jordan Westberg, Grayson Rodriguez, Albert Suarez. It's not good to have those 4 guys out. Jordan Westberg and Colton Cowser, you can essentially say missed 4 months because Jordan Westberg, I'm throwing out April. He was clearly injured and was just fighting through it because Jordan Westberg is tougher than nails and he's just going to play, right? And then, again, that is a list that includes Kyle Bradish and Tyler Wells, but you knew they were going to be out going into spring training. In May as well, Tyler O'Neill, 6 games, records 1 hit. Adley Rutschman continues to struggle a little bit, figuring things out offensively. Cedric Mullins has a tough month with a 574 OPS. Ramon Urias struggles in place of Jordan Westberg with a 597 OPS. Heston Kjerstad struggles in place of Colton Cowser with a 437 OPS.
Yeah.
A lot of the things that happened in the lineup, Urias and Kjerstad, you weren't expecting to be everyday players. Heston Kjerstad figuring things out at the big league level. It was a tough season for him. He's also going through some fatigue at AAA Norfolk right now, and we're not going to speculate on what that is. He's been held out of games for a bit, so just wishing for the best with Heston Kjerstad, where there's been a lot of different things keeping him off the field. Anyway, side note there. But again, Adley Rutschman and Cedric Mullins having a tough month is fine. Those things happen during a baseball season. Adley Rutschman got off to a slower start than he would have liked, figuring some things out mechanically, whatever. That sort of stuff happens. Cedric Mullins has been kind of a streaky guy throughout his career. Okay, he doesn't have a great month of May. That is a tougher pill to swallow when Tyler O'Neill only plays 6 games, Colton Cowser misses the entire month, and Jordan Westberg misses the entire month. Again, those things can happen independently, but when they happen at the same time, it leads to a lineup that just doesn't really have a ton of cohesion and a ton of direction, and they're not putting up a lot of runs.
And I just think that 2025 has just really been succumbed to the domino effect, where you don't necessarily have all pieces of the puzzle. I'm just kind of using 2 different game puns there, but you don't have all pieces of the puzzle working in conjunction with the other. And like you mentioned, yes, you can have 1 or 2 guys having slumps at that time, but when everyone is not necessarily performing at their best or everyone is falling to injury, it gets a lot harder to dig yourself out of that hole, especially when we kind of looked back at May. I remember having a podcast on it where, okay, the May schedule is a lot easier, at least at the time, before you kind of knew how the Brewers were going to be. Obviously, the Red Sox were going to be difficult, but you had every other team besides those 2 in the May schedule below 500. Some of them have pulled away since then, obviously, but at that point in time, we were saying how, okay, you can still get your way out of this, but the injuries didn't stop. You weren't necessarily getting everyone back from the injured list, and you still had guys fighting through their struggles. So it was, all in all, just a very big kind of domino effect. You started to see some improvements with the starting rotation. Charlie Morton had his experience in the bullpen and then coming back slightly back into the rotation. But you still had a very taxed bullpen that was kind of making up for lost time in the months of April and March and trying to catch up to when May started to see a little bit more progression in the starting rotation. So nothing was working at the same time.
Yeah, Trevor Rogers only starts one game in the month of May. You're still missing Bradish, Wells, Rodriguez, Suarez, Zach Eflin. He's coming back from injury and trying to get back on track. He has a 5.64 ERA in 4 starts in May. Felix Bautista in the bullpen. Again, trying to come back from Tommy John surgery, getting back into the swing of things. He's got a 5.59 ERA in the month of May. And I've said it 1,000 times. All of those things independently make sense. It doesn't make any of these guys bad baseball players.
Right.
It makes it, it makes you realize that it's a 162-game season and guys are going to go through ups and downs. But the downs just all happened at the same time. And it's frustrating when you look at June and July and you start to see what this team could have been and should have been.
Yeah.
When you have the supplemental pieces that really stepped up, Ryan O'Hearn and Ramon Laureano. O'Hearn, obviously, with an all-star season. Ramon Laureano with kind of a career resurgence here this year. The Orioles did well with him on some mechanical adjustments. He has an outstanding season. Those pieces really stepped up. And then Gunnar Henderson, after getting off to a slow start to the season, was really picking things up. Adley Rutschman, the same way. Tyler O'Neill, over the past few weeks, has been healthy and mashing.
Yeah.
That's what Tyler O'Neill was supposed to be in the middle of the lineup. I know his injury history, but when he's healthy, he is really good. And we have seen that over the last few weeks. And I think you can see the vision for what was supposed to happen in this offseason. I think it's frustrating. I know there's a tendency to look back in the offseason, and sure, there are arguments to be made for, hey, could have done this, should have done that. It's so easy to do that in hindsight, but the vision to me, looking back, knowing what we know about how June and July went, makes sense to me. Because, take the pitching rotation as an example. You bring in Charlie Morton and Tomoyuki Sugano. It has been well reported that you made a big push for Corbin Burns. He would have been the highest paid pitcher in baseball based on average annual value, based on the deal that was reportedly offered there, right? So you make a big push for him, doesn't work out. You go out and you get Charlie Morton and Tomoyuki Sugano to stabilize the rotation. At the top of things, you thought you were going to have Grayson Rodriguez and Zach Eflin. That doesn't end up happening. But even without Grayson Rodriguez, you still have Zach Eflin. You were hoping for a healthy Trevor Rogers, Charlie Morton, Tomoyuki Sugano, Dean Kramer. Those 5 guys, especially based on how they pitched in June and July. I know Tomoyuki Sugano has struggled a little bit. Zach Eflin has struggled with just not being able to stay fully healthy. But let's say that you even have Albert Suarez in that mix if Zach Eflin continues to go on the injured list. Those 5 guys, based on how they pitched in June and July, get you to the All-Star break. And this offense was supposed to be a juggernaut because that's what it was last season. So these 5 guys in the starting rotation, they get you to the All-Star break. They get you to the trade deadline. There you trade for an ace. And then all of a sudden you have an ace at the top of your rotation.
Yeah.
A bunch of guys that are solid down below them. Maybe Zach Eflin and Grayson Rodriguez are back at the top of things. And then all of a sudden you get Kyle Bradish back at the end of August, mid-August, whatever it may be. And then you go into the playoffs and you have Kyle Bradish, a guy you traded for at the deadline, maybe Grayson Rodriguez and Zach Eflin, and one of Charlie Morton, Tomoyuki Sugano, Dean Kramer, whoever it is. That plan makes sense to me.
Yeah, 100%.
And it's a plan that you saw coming to fruition in June and July, and they just weren't able to dig themselves out of the hole that they created in April and May for all the reasons that we just went over. But that plan, pitching-wise, makes sense to me. If you couldn't get Corbin Burns, don't overpay for a pitcher that you don't think is worthy of the contract. Go get guys that stabilize things. Get to the deadline, trade for an ace, get to mid-August, get Kyle Bradish back, and then all of a sudden you're in the playoffs and you have 3 aces potentially between the guy you traded for, Kyle Bradish, and Grayson Rodriguez. That makes sense to me.
Yeah, and you can even lump Zach Eflin into that too, where he was most certainly an ace caliber type of pitcher. And it also just makes sense too when you looked back at it, Mike Elias, everybody was looking towards getting Kyle Bradish back as your own little deadline a little bit, where you get him back from the injured list. You have a whole nother pitcher to throw in that top 3 of the starting rotation. I think you can also lump into what you didn't necessarily have a part of the vision is a change in coaching staff, because you did not expect in the slightest to have Brandon Hyde dismiss and have Tony Mansolino take charge. And I'm not in any way trying to speculate who has done a better job at all, because things could have been different if you didn't have these injuries with Brandon Hyde. The only reason I'm bringing that up is because it just goes to show, one, it wasn't part of the vision, and two, it's a big change to have to deal with when you're a young player like Gunnar Henderson, Adley Rutschman, that whole core who has only had Brandon Hyde as their manager. It is a big thing to deal with that young in your career, to have to deal with a different kind of change in management. And I only bring that up because it just, one, did not go with the vision or the game plan of the 2025 season. And two, it just made things harder to kind of get back on top.
Yeah, and that's something we didn't talk about in May, but is also worthy of talking about. That's a big change.
Yeah.
And that is, again, like you said, it doesn't mean, oh, this guy was doing this and this guy was doing this, and all of a sudden the team is way different. Tony Mansolino has said a lot that, just how much he's learned from Brandon Hyde and how much things weren't really changing, because they did a lot of things well over the past few seasons.
And guys coming back from injuries and
right,
everything.
But that is still a big thing to deal with. It's a big change in the clubhouse, and it affects the human beings that are playing this game. And so that's an important thing to note as well. But, like I said, the vision made sense to me
100%
in hindsight. And this offense, if Gunnar Henderson doesn't miss spring training and Colton Cowser and Jordan Westberg are healthy for April and May, even if Jackson Holliday and Adley Rutschman get off to slow starts. Jackson Holliday was awesome in May. He started to pick it up. Adley Rutschman was awesome in June. He really started to pick it up. He was great going into July, right? Like, all of those things can happen, and you can still have this elite offense, but you can't have Gunnar not healthy right away and Jordan Westberg missing, essentially 2 months, like we've talked about. Colton Cowser missing 2 months. Tyler O'Neill missing 2 months. That's too many things. That is too many things happening. The catching as well. We haven't even talked about that part of the conversation, where Gary Sanchez comes back, tears the cover off the baseball. He goes down with injury. Maverick Hanley comes up, gets a lot of praise for calling a nice baseball game. He goes down with injury. Chadwick Tromp, same thing. Great defense, calls a good game. He goes down with injury.
Yeah, all while Adley's down.
The Orioles at one point made up a third of all catchers on the injured list in Major League Baseball. At one point, they had 4 guys on the IL, and there were 12 catchers on the IL in the entirety of baseball. 33% of the injuries were on the Baltimore Orioles in terms of catchers. Like, that sort of stuff, how it impacts the pitching staff. There are just so many things. And it's frustrating, like I've said, when you see June and July, because you know the kind of baseball team that this could be, and we saw it. Tyler O'Neill back in the middle of the lineup, swinging it really well. Gunnar Henderson looking like one of the best players in baseball. Adley Rutschman was mashing as one of the best catchers in baseball. The supplemental pieces playing well. Jordan Westberg having an outstanding, front half of the season. Colton Cowser back. I know he hasn't been hitting up to his standard, but with outstanding outfield defense, everything just made sense.
Right.
Jackson Holliday progressing. Kobe Mayo progressing. That's what this baseball team was supposed to be. And if every domino didn't fall in the wrong direction, then we'd be in a much different spot right now.
And I think I'm glad you mentioned just if every domino didn't fall, where we would kind of be right now, because I think it's important too to look back and kind of zoom out, like I said before, but kind of look at different things in perspective. Obviously, I am not saying that it's a good thing anyone hit the injured list, because that is far from what I'm trying to say. But if you didn't have Ryan Mountcastle hit the injured list, you wouldn't get more reps for Kobe Mayo, and you wouldn't see him progress the way that he has right now. Jackson Holliday was probably going to be the everyday second baseman anyway, but Jorge Mateo on the injured list to start the season, or early in the season rather. And then even Trevor Rogers, if he had not started on the injured list, who knows what his development plan had been like to come back and be the great starting pitcher that he is right now.
Sure.
Obviously, I'm not saying you want anyone to be injured, because that has been a huge part of why things are different for this team and why 2025 has not gone according to plan. But in perspective, it adds different opportunity for different players. It gives more room for Kobe Mayo, like I mentioned. So things, while they might not seem like it's going the way for 2025, it will be a bigger and better picture maybe for 2026 and beyond. I think Trevor Rogers, Kobe Mayo are the two biggest examples there.
Yeah, there are injuries that have opened up opportunities for guys that they might not otherwise have had, and it is giving us a chance to be able to look at them, more frequently than we would have before. And this team, being where they are in the standings does the same thing, because in a few weeks, I'm sure you are going to see Dylan Beavers and Samuel Basayo. And if the Orioles were in contention and they were making a push for the division, maybe you see those guys, but I'm not confident that they are on this big league roster. I think Samuel Basayo probably, maybe given the numbers that Dylan Beavers has put up this year, sure, they could be here, but it would probably be a Kobe Mayo situation from a season ago where, he's here, but he's not really getting at bats because this team is trying to make a playoff push, and that's not the time, right? This is the time for Dylan Beavers and Samuel Basayo to come up over the final 2 months of the season and get consistent playing time. And that's an opportunity that they now have that would not have been afforded to them if the Orioles were making a playoff push, right? There are probably plenty of starting pitchers who are in that same boat. We'll see what happens over the final 2 months, but, do you see a Chase McDermott over, that stretch if he continues to, if he puts up some better numbers in AAA Norfolk? Are you going to see the bullpen arms establish themselves? Like we said off the top of things, where Cade Stroud is probably not in this bullpen consistently, assuming you don't deal away the four guys that you did at the deadline if you're in contention. But now Cade Stroud has a chance to establish himself for 2026. So while it's not where you want to be, last week we talked about how much better the farm system is. Yeah. And at the big league level, you have guys that have the opportunity to step up and establish themselves as potential future pieces.
And it's an opportunity, too, for Beavers and Basayo or whoever else that they decide to bring up in the next coming months. It's an opportunity that Holiday and Kobe Mayo didn't necessarily get. They got a lot of criticism for how they made their first major league stints and how it was not as advertised for how they were performing in the minor leagues or why that they were top prospects in the organization or all of baseball for that matter. They didn't have that opportunity to kind of have those growing pains and have everyday opportunities because of trying to make a playoff push. Right now is very different. Yes, there are still injuries, and yes, there are some guys that are being brought in, and who knows what everyday opportunities will look like for Beavers or Basayo when it comes to be their time. But it's a very different situation where they're not trying to make the playoff push, and there's a lot of pressure like Kobe Mayo and Jackson Holiday had. I think that they have progressed very well for what they were dealt in those positions and those situations, but now is a really good opportunity for some other guys to make their first MLB debuts.
Yeah, and what you hope over the final 2 months of the season is that there are those names that establish themselves. Yeah. Maybe it's a Cade Stroud in the bullpen. Maybe it's a Jeremiah Jackson showing that he can be a utility piece for a winning team next season. And you want to see the core continue to play good baseball, because when those five guys that Mansolino has noted carry the offense, this is a good team. And this is what they are going to have to be next season, because yes, there is work to do in the offseason. The Orioles, I'm sure, are going to be busy and active and making as many moves as they can to be a competitive team in 2026. The core is not going to change. Yeah. It's the reason they didn't move any of those guys at the deadline. They are all going to be here, and if the Orioles are playing good baseball in 26, it's going to be because Gunnar Henderson, Adley Rutschman, Jordan Westburg, Jackson Holiday, and Colton Cowser are playing good baseball. That's what this team is going to have to be next year, no matter what moves are made in the offseason. Those five guys are still going to be the leaders on the team, and hopefully, maybe there's a veteran here or there that you bring in and becomes, a middle part of the lineup, whatever it may be. I don't know what the offseason moves are going to be. I'm sure we are going to have plenty of podcasts discussing what those moves could be to help this team get back to being competitive and where they want to be in 2026. But it's going to be those five guys. I guarantee it.
Yeah. And you also mentioned Cade Stroud and maybe like a Chase McDermott, Corbin Martin, guys that are trying to prove themselves in the second half of this season and what's left. I also want to lump Cade Povich in that because obviously he has had a lot more reps than those guys. But I think that he still is given this opportunity, and he still has to prove himself in these next 2 months or however long is left of the season. Math. But I think that Cade Povich does have to prove himself while he's healthy. I think he has an opportunity to do so and to be able to kind of show that he can face the lineup for the third time in a row and prove durability, which is something that he struggled with throughout this season. But he still has that opportunity and that chance to be able to prove himself for 2026, which he hasn't necessarily gotten to do in 2025 so far.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Brandon Young could be in that conversation too,
sure.
where he's put together some nice starts, but it's a similar thing for him where he's caught around that 75, 80 pitch mark. He's got to get through the third time of the order. Can he do that or the final 2 months of the season? We are going to see. It is the opportunity that these guys are now afforded. It's the opportunity that the Orioles now have where they are not making a push for the division. And of course, that's not where you want to be. But at the deadline, it gave you the chance to bolster a farm system that needed a shot in the arm. And over the final 2 months, it gives you the chance to evaluate things. What guys are going to be here next year? What guys could be contributors? Is the core playing good baseball? Are we feeling optimistic going into next year? Because I think there's absolutely a scenario where you get to September and Gunnar Henderson continues to look like one of the best players in baseball. Adley Rutschman hits well. Jordan Westberg hits well. Jackson Holliday hits well. Kyle Bradish comes back and, maybe isn't giving you 8-inning shutouts, but Kyle Bradish comes back and looks good. And then all of a sudden you can start to look at 26 and say, okay, I get what these pieces are supposed to be. Hopefully we have a healthier season of Tyler O'Neill and the core guys play well and you bring in this piece or that piece in the lineup and Kobe Mayo and Samuel Basayo and Dylan Beavers look like they could be pieces for next year. Oh, and then in the starting rotation you have Kyle Bradish and Dean Kramer and Cade Povich has looked good down the stretch. There are absolutely scenarios where the Orioles can make you feel good about next year. I know you're not going to feel awesome about where the record stands for the rest of this season. It's not where anybody wanted to be, but there's a real scenario where they play good baseball over the final 2 months. And even if it doesn't reflect in the win-loss column, if the pieces that are going to be important in 2026 play well, you can be optimistic going into next year. I think that scenario is absolutely still in play.
And it's frustrating, yes, to have to kind of shift your perspective on the season, but at this point, there's not really nothing else you can do.
Yeah, this is where we are.
Yeah, so you kind of just have to look towards 2026. Elias has said, obviously, leading up to the deadline, that they're focusing on 2026. That's clearly what they did. So there is that opportunity now to have to look at kind of the minuscule and individual performances of players and visualize what they will be in 2026. Because at this point in time, that's the only thing you can kind of forecast right now. It's not necessarily the same position that you were in 2025, and that's unfortunate and frustrating, but it's what you're dealt with right now.
Yeah, and I think my takeaway here, just kind of having talked through everything, is don't be a revisionist about what happened this season. You see the kind of baseball team that they were supposed to be in June and July, and I think it's also fair to look at April and May. And yeah, you can be critical about how the first few months of the season went, and you're allowed to be critical of the off season if that's what you want to do. But if you are going to do that, you also need the context of the fact that they've been a good baseball team over June and July and understand that that's what it was supposed to be if pretty much everything didn't go wrong in April and May in terms of what could have gone wrong. And like I said, the point of going back through those months was not to say, well, this guy was the reason that the Orioles weren't good. It's to say, here's the amount of things that happened over this month between injuries and guys underperforming. And just looking at it from a holistic, hey, all of this stuff happened at the same time, and that's why we're here.
Right.
And then less of those things happened in June and July, and wouldn't you know, they're a 6-game over 500 baseball team.
Yeah, I completely agree with that takeaway. It 100% was a domino effect in 2025. The end of 2024, you could even say that too. But moving on to 2026, if you can get really great performances out of Gunnar, out of Adley, out of the core, and also from guys who are still trying to prove themselves, it means a whole lot for the next season.
Yep.
And like you mentioned, not being revisionist, but you can also be kind of an optimist for the next season. If those things fall into place for the remainder of 2025, it will mean a whole lot for what's moving on to next season.
Yeah, and we'll see. And I think over the final 2 months of the season, you're looking for those things to be optimistic about going into next year. You're looking for the young guys to play well, all of that stuff that we have talked about. But I think that'll just about do it for this week's edition of the Bird's Nest. That was a long one, not quite as long as our trade deadline episode last week that I think was, an hour and a half?
Yeah,
because the Orioles made so many deals. But hopefully we will be back. We have not been good about it, going live on YouTube and Facebook at 11 a.m. every Wednesday. But I do think next Wednesday we should be live at 11 a.m. on our Facebook and YouTube channels. We were live at 11 a.m.-ish today at 10 a.m. Thank you for following along an hour early on our Facebook and YouTube channels, or you can catch us after the fact on Spotify, SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. You can find us here on the Bird's Nest. Big thank you to Amy Jennings behind the scenes for producing this one. For Annie Klaff, I am Brendan Mortensen, and we'll catch you next time.